People were very frightened. People were looking at life and death and not knowing what to do.
Sometimes people are like in deep cynical thought process and that negative loop and you will see depression at its worst.
Yeah.
So how do you bring spirituality there? When you face death, it's almost a kind of rebirth. Could you share how you prepare somebody who's having that near death situation? How do you prepare them?
Generally today there's more of a tendency towards spirituality. What do you think the difference between religion and spirituality is?
Healthcare today is highly advanced in technology, but often starved of meaning. In moments of illness, loss, and uncertainty, what many people truly seek is not just treatment, but connection, purpose, and inner grounding. In today's episode, I am joined by Ken as we explore why spirituality has a vital role in healthcare and other systems of support. We journey through his personal path into chaplaincy, unpack the difference between spirituality and religion, and discuss how addressing the human spirit can profoundly influence healing, resilience, and compassionate care. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and now let's go over to Ken. Ken, welcome to Ayurvedic Healing and Beyond podcast. It's an honor to have you here.
Thank you, Dr. Vignesh. It's great, an honor to be here, and we've had a great week, me and my wife, and thank you for having us.
So Ken, you said what you do is chaplain.
That's correct.
Yeah. Tell me more about that.
A chaplain is in America and other countries, and I think it's also growing here in India. Chaplain is oftentimes a religious, some type of like a person who has been ordained, a religious person in a secular space. Mm-hmm. So we have chaplains in hospitals, in hospice, and we have them in, assisted living. But we also have chaplaincies are required in higher education and other places like prisons and military. So chaplains are basically ordained people from different traditions, different faiths. I'm Hindu, and I work with Christians, Muslims, Sikhs. We work together to provide an environment of spiritual care in these different secular environments.
And what is the core message that you're trying to...
Well, one thing that seems to be growing in terms of how we look at health and wellness is that there's an aspect of spirituality that doesn't necessarily... It's not just the physiological health. It's not just mental health, it's not just emotional health, but now they're also thinking there's a spiritual health, which could also be religious. But has a lot to do with these existential problems. And I started doing chaplaincy when I started in a hospital. And actually it was in January 2020, not expecting that there'd be a global pandemic. And the need for spiritual care was enormous. People were very frightened. People were looking at life and death and not knowing what to do. And now that, the pandemic is past, and now I work in spiritual and higher education, but the issues are still these existential things, like what is the purpose of my life? Mm-hmm. What am I doing with my life? What is the value of the things that I'm doing in my life or with the time that I have left?
As I remember when we were discussing before, you said that you used to work in the hospice. And I've been to multiple hospice during my medical training also, especially when people, they finish their chemotherapy and, they are in their last days. The doctor has given them the ultimatum and they have to prepare their will.
Yeah.
I have few days left. It's not an easy place to be. And sometimes you see people are like happy that I'm saying goodbye to my body. Sometimes people are like in deep cynical thought process and that negative loop and you will see depression at its worst.
Yeah.
So how do you bring spirituality there? It can be a big challenging part. And some will take it because that's the only hope that they have.
Yeah.
But some can be like, who the hell are you to talk about?
Yeah.
God, can't you see what I'm suffering through right now?
Yeah. Well, one thing is that it's been a profound experience for me as a chaplain. The truth of the matter is there are many emergency rooms, many trauma bays, and people who are at the end stages of their lives where there's no words that you can say to just comfort a person. In fact, in many cases, there were no prayers that would comfort a person. I remember someone saying, like, what are you praying? Why am I praying now? I prayed to God last week. I prayed to God the week before, and he didn't, not only is he not helping me, He didn't save my brother when he died. He didn't save my nephew. And this was when I worked in Newark, New Jersey, which was a very crime-ridden place. It's, in many ways, there's nothing you can say. But one thing they teach us in chaplaincy is this thing, and it is a Christian principle. They call it the ministry of presence. Presence. And
like to be present moment.
To be present. Sometimes you can say something, and sometimes if you're just there, it actually is profound for that person. They may not even realize that you're in the room with them until hours later or days later, and they've called back and said, I remember you were there. Thank you for being there with me in this difficult time. And I want to talk about, what I'm going through. And that's when you can start helping and doing spiritual care, like we discussed, those kind of existential dilemmas.
Mm-hmm.
But presence is a very powerful thing. It is something that I think is also part of my faith tradition. And we say, like in the Upanishads, Aham Brahmasmi or Tattvam Asi, we are present, we are connected in the spirit. And being a chaplain, a person who's a religious person, means to be able to connect with people in this, when your body is, you could see the mortality of your body. You start to think like, what is beyond this, or what do I have to hold on to? It really is asking about the true self and the people in your life, or you really see the things that are important. And it's not just like the job and the nice house and everything you've worked for. And a lot of these kind of emergency situations, all of that just pales away. It goes away in the background, and your life and the things that are important in your life become very evident. It's a lot more subtle and much more spiritual, we see.
I mean, working in the hospice, share something profound that you learned.
One thing I've definitely learned that initially when I started doing chaplaincy, I remember my supervisor said, well, this person, say for example, is a Muslim patient, and she said, why don't you go see them? I was like, but I'm not Muslim. I don't think I could give them help. And she said, just go and just check. And I remember thinking, I'll just help her connect to the imam and they'll be able to do things. But when I met them, they were in such pain, and they said, the chaplain is here. And she wasn't actually looking for, I did help connect her to the imam, but she really just wanted to talk, and she wanted to talk about her faith. She knew that I was Hindu, but she wanted to just share what she's going through and how scared she is.
Mm-hmm.
And for somebody to do that, especially in places of healthcare, because people come in and out of rooms and all they're doing is taking blood, taking measurements, telling you how your health is changing. And if you have time, somebody that sits down and listens to what you're feeling, what you're experiencing, that changed the way that I saw a lot of what I've done as a initiated Diksha. I do puja in the temple. It wasn't just about doing rituals. It's about accompanying the person and what they're going through. It's not just, say, Shraddha. It's not just, say, end of life. It's being there to help with the person who's grieving and experiencing these like very, very deep experiences of life.
Mm-hmm.
And it changed everything that I knew about my theology, my philosophy of life.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if those are some of the experiences that you may have seen when you were doing your training, but it's very transformative, not just to understand the person's illness, but to also understand the kind of human experience of what they are going through, and that what I will also go through, what I'll also experience in my life, and the loss and the grief, and also the joy of being able to acknowledge be grateful for the things that they have in their lives, that we all have in our lives. Yeah, it's that, like I said earlier, that presence. It's a very powerful thing. And if you could be present for someone, even not just in terms of health, in terms of like our families, to be present is that concept really has transformed what I do and what I try to do. It's hard to be present constantly, but I think it's probably the most important thing that we could do for each other. It's a difference between, like, you could say like texting is impersonal and you're not present, but it really depends on what you're texting.
Mm-hmm.
You're texting like, hey, how are you? I just want to check on you. But sometimes you could have a phone call that you're not present. You're just like, yeah, right? Or you're in front of someone, and they're talking to you and you're like not registering anything. But that presence, sometimes it doesn't matter what the medium is, but you're there. You're there with that person, connecting with them. Those are the biggest kind of experiences I've had in chaplaincy.
When you say present is so difficult, I remember when I was a student in the class, and especially when they're teaching Hindi. Hindi is like the North Indian language.
Yes, yeah.
And me coming from Kerala, I always struggle. Even now I struggle. When she's talking in Hindi, I'm like, nothing goes into my head and I get lost in my own thoughts and I'm absent-minded. And I got that label that you're such an absent-minded student, especially in my Hindi classes. And the teacher used to always say, can you please pay attention? And I used to think, I need to pay attention. It's like a currency. You pay attention. Because it's that difficult sometimes, you get so carried away by being lost and you have to put your heart and soul and just pay your attention. Sometimes it comes easily, naturally, effortlessly. Sometimes you have to fight gravity to put your attention and be present there.
Yeah. In my particular religious tradition, the Gaudiya Vaishnava, from the tradition of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, they cite a scripture, the Padma Prana, about how one should chant their japa, about these kind of, they call them aparad, these offenses to Harinam. And there are many different ones, like don't, if you do a sinful activity and think that the Harinam is going to fix it, or if you think that maybe there's not seeing like the focus of, say, Krishna and seeing that is equal to other, maybe other types of deities or something like that. But you should be focused on that. But the one that they said in the Padma Purana, that was the most, maybe the root cause of all these things, and there were like 10, there are 10 listed, is something called pramada, which means in this maybe translation is inattention. And if you being absent-minded. So even in your you could also be present, or you should be present in your prayer. You should be present in your meditation. And that's part of like the whole practice of meditation is not to be distracted, not to move here from there, but to be focused. And if you're doing japa and you have a mantra, then be present to the mantra, to be connected to the mantra. Even then, like, yes, there's a human-to-human kind of presence, but also with divinity. It's a principle, that principle of presence carries all throughout, whether it's our practice or connecting with others or sadhana, our spiritual practice. Yeah, this idea that being connected has a lot to do with that idea of being present. It's hard, as you said, make sure you're there, but it is really quite a discipline to try to be there for others, even ourselves also, to be present for ourselves.
When you do that in the hospice, what have you observed, being present, and how do you make that presence felt, and how is that helping that person?
On an individual basis, its consistency is a very helpful thing. Even if at first I remember walking into rooms and like, I don't want to talk to you, and they're like, okay, that's no problem. I'm just here to check on you, and then I'll be back because I have to be back. I work for the hospital. I work for hospice, so I'll see you next week. And then you start seeing them open up and like, oh, it's good, welcome back. How you feeling today? Oh, you mind if we, they would ask, like, do you mind if you have a little prayer? I just wasn't feeling good last week. On an individual basis, has a big impact. And it means being consistent, trying to be consistent. And I remember also in another case, there was this assisted living home. And I remember our hospice company asked me to stop there because there were a few patients. And when I got there, it was this whole section of this nursing home that were all like aunties and uncles, just all South Asian, and they were all just in this section of the nursing home, and they had their own kind of like worship room. And initially I was there to visit a few patients, but then I started, doing a weekly arti, and everyone would come from that little section. They'd come into the room, they'd hear, they hear the bell, everyone would come in and they would sit, it gave them a chance to talk and then also to sing some bhajans together. It's that kind of thing, that kind of like, just make sure that you come, make sure that you're present. They may not, recognize you. They may think initially they may be pushing you off. In many cases, just so needed, desperately needed. In a place like that nursing home, I felt like, I asked, like, is anybody coming? They're like, no, that's really hard. Not many people come here. And just to have some kind of like, even just an arti, they would all come out. And that was one of my favorite experiences in doing chaplaincy in the nursing homes also.
Mhm.
Again, it comes back to, if you want to be present, it does take quite an effort, but it makes a very deep impact. Even in hospitals where we did rounds, we wouldn't just check on the patients, we'd also check on the staff. We'd check and see the nurses and like, how are you doing today? And, that was also part of our strategy to make sure that our people, the doctors, the nurses, and the staff, the janitorial staff, how are they doing? It's a very huge task, but I think that's what makes a difference from, like, say, successful companies or successful, entrepreneur efforts. Just being present, people acknowledge, people feel seen and heard, and that takes a bit of it can be hard, but if you can do that on a consistent basis, it makes very deep impact.
Yes, it can be hard, but not being present can also be hard.
Yes.
You choose which battle to
Yes,
take.
there's also repercussions for that.
Yes.
Yeah, and life is difficult. Sometimes you have to try to make those choices are there. Like, the truth of the matter is, for me, as a good chaplain, it could also mean that I'm not home as much. And that's something that you have to learn, that everybody has to learn how to balance. Like, who are we going to be there for? And it's hard. It is very hard. Actually, those are some of the biggest life lessons, like when we realize that maybe we can't be there for everyone. And how do we resolve that? Or how do we acknowledge that there's, something that you may have to let go, or someone you may have to let go, and how can you do that in a way that's loving? Yeah, that's hard. It is quite a task. It's not as easy as it may sound.
Do you see when people are appearing closer to death, their presence get more refined, or it goes off, or it's their personality that will reveal it? Because there's this saying, when you face death, it's almost a kind of rebirth.
Yeah. There is, in those rooms where I have been with people who are passing away, the presence is certainly much more felt, much with the family that are there. Of course, everyone is like focused. The individual themselves are also, they're there. Of course, there's the decline of like vital signs, and oftentimes consciousness kind of goes in and out. There are many times where I've seen people very alert up until the end, up until the last breath. There is a sense that there is going to be a transition. As a chaplain, as a person in spiritual care, we've prepared them for that transition, that we've spoken to them about that transition, that they're moving on to this next, whether it's next life or what some will consider eternity in whatever religious traditions they belong to. We accompany them as far as we can in that. Their journey, as we'll all discover, is their personal journey, and where they're going in, as far as that room is concerned, only they know. So presence is very strong in those circumstances. And even though it may seem like the person is fading, I've also seen many circumstances where, and they always say that hearing is one of the last things to go. And so people are still, constantly talking to them, guiding them through. And very much like our traditions where, people are still reading or saying prayers to them in their ear in these periods of transition. Yeah, it's a very intense moment of presence.
I'm curious, could you share how you prepare somebody who's having that near-death situation? How do you prepare them that? I think it can be one of the most challenging things, because sometimes when you see their pain, you can get so engrossed in that pain that you also can short circuit.
Yeah.
And you can also take that pain onto yourself.
Yes.
I mean, has that happened to you? I want to come back to that question also.
Yeah. Well, the short answer is yes.
Yeah.
But how do you prepare a person if it's in a case where in hospice it is have to do with that consistency of presence, and saying like, well, how would you want to do this? There are legal things that also chaplains have to work on and try to make sure that their final statements, whether it's wills, that also encourage that they do that, or if they want to record like statements, we work with them in those cases as well. We also speak with them about, how they would want their final rites to be done, and whatever tradition that is, we always try our best to accommodate that. I've done some shraddhas for people And, they may ask if I could do that for them. And it takes like a commitment. It's a commitment beyond just that transition, because it's also taking care of the final rites 13 days afterwards and things like that. And continuing to encourage people to do that a year from that time. Yeah, there are a lot of like pragmatic things to do to prepare, but also I tried as, hospice chaplains to be consistent and just making sure that things are going according to the way that they want. And that can be complicated, especially with family. Family may want something different. Somebody wants to be cremated and brought here, and family doesn't want them to be cremated in different traditions and things like that. So it is complicated. But as far as the second question about carrying the weight of those things, actually, it is a fact. We do carry the weight of those experiences. Some people, I think, shy away from it, rightfully so. And even sometimes I mean, that's maybe why I shifted also into higher education. But there's the team that works in hospice is actually really quite professional and quite stoic about the practices and how to make sure that patients are taken care of in those cases. But as far as my own or people who are in that work, they have to really check in with their colleagues. And I would regularly check in with my chaplaincy team, and especially if they were like very difficult like transitions, whether there was a connection with them or if it was like especially in a hospital, that was a very tragic and sad experience. We always check in with each other and make sure that if we need time off, or if we need to, go into kind of like a spiritual, we need to take a bit of a reset. We need to make sure that we're taking care of each other in that way.
Have you observed somebody who was like very, very afraid to die, and the other way around too? They're like, I'm so looking forward to die. Oh
yes, I've definitely seen that also. Usually in the latter case, these are people who are oftentimes very faithful in whatever religious tradition they are. They've lived a life, and they know like this is what I did this, my practice. I prayed. I was regular. I was consistent. They feel confident. Their faith is strong, and their family is also like the family's always certain. Like, yeah, I know where my mom is, or I know where my grandmother is. And in those cases, I see, yes, ready. But a lot of times, those who aren't ready are quite young. They're quite frightened. Again, I don't mean to go back to this old idea of being present, but that's what else could you do except be present with them until the moment where they may pass. Because the doctor, you work with the doctor, you work with the team to try to make sure that they will have the highest way of surviving. But tragically, some people don't feel ready. And the best you could do, be present, but also give them a reminder of the things that they have in their lives, the things that they're grateful for, and for the things, we in our tradition, we have this idea that if somebody has more wants than that goes into the next life, try to remind them that there's also many things to aspire for, to be disconnected from, to think about like the next transition. But it is hard. It is hard. Some people are not ready.
Like there is a saying, when you know that things are not going to recover when the disease is quite strong, and you're just counting the number of days, there's a saying that we try to add more life to the years.
Yeah.
Instead of adding more years to the life, we add more life to the years. And that's what we say about being present.
Yes.
And also in one of my teachers who I really look up to, because I learned a lot about Ayurveda and healing from him. He used to say, when a soul is very upset, but I don't know if soul can be upset, but when a person is really upset with their life, when they lost their hopes, they will try to find innovative diseases so that they can die quickly and take rebirth.
Oh.
This was his statement. So when you get such patients, there is nothing much you can do other than just hearing them out, and no matter what you treat, they will, okay, this won't work, because they are convinced, I want to say goodbye to this life. At that time I was like, wow, sometimes people can engage in activities that are like a slow euthanasia.
Yeah.
Like they could smoke, they could be in that stressful pattern, and then suddenly you see an accident and they're gone.
Yeah.
Or suicide, for example. And I'm just curious if you saw people like they are so frustrated in their lives that I am happy to say goodbye to the life?
I saw quite a few. I mean, because I worked in a very impoverished area that we dealt with a lot of, homelessness, houselessness, drug addiction. And part of my job as a chaplain, actually, which was innovative in this hospital, was to make sure we wanted to provide something after discharge. So if they needed housing, we wanted to find them housing. If they needed a drug rehab program, we found that for them. But you would be surprised to see how many people would get a drug rehab program in a kind of far country area, and they take a bus all the way back into the city and just go back. And sometimes I'd meet their family, and their families would be in a good place with good jobs, and like, we're willing to take our family back in, but they keep on going back to this. Yes, there is a lot of like anger,
frustration,
self-hatred, like resentment that they can't repair. Maybe they were abused. It's like a haunting. And so, yes, they will do these things to quicken their life. And it is quite self-destructive. I can't think of it in any other way. Sometimes I'd see that and just like, there's no other way for me to think that you are trying to just end. Not in like a suicide, like a straight up, acute suicide.
Yeah. But it's like a slow death.
Time. Yeah. In those cases, we tried our best to give them some type of therapy, whether it's existential. Some of the best cases I saw were people who were like, yes, they did have faith. If they had faith, they had a chance to kind of clean up. In those cases, I saw some transformation, but it is a very, very hard thing to break. Whether it's like the socioeconomic things or the substance abuse, those are very hard for people to get. But people tried. Like, this program was trying to change that. We did have success, but there was a large portion of unfortunate, like, I guess we call failures. But yes, yeah, you do definitely see that. Those are the ones that they wanted this program to see. Like, let's try to have this spiritual change. And so we gave what we could. We tried to connect them with communities, and it had an effect. But yeah, those kind of what they call social determinants of health, it brings them back, whether they're back on the street or they don't have a place to live or they don't have a job. You try to provide that if possible.
Does spirituality work in a low socioeconomic group?
It worked very well, actually. In Newark, there were, on any street in that place, it was a very poor area. There's a lot of poverty. But on any street, you could probably find 3 houses of worship, churches, mosques, or different types of places, Christian, Muslim. But it seems to be a place where there is a lot of faith. But there is also a lot of strife. There was also a lot of poverty. That's also just part of it. Yes, it is possible in these places where there's poverty, there is spirituality.
Or would you say it's spirituality or religion? Because I see that I used to read religion works fantastic when there is poverty. I don't know how true that is, but I can also connect to that.
Yeah.
Because they are always in fear. There is nothing to lose. And in fact, one of the reasons why communism came into existence, Karl Marx used to say religion is the opium of the masses. And he said that there is nothing that you need to lose other than your chain, because you're always stuck there.
Yeah.
So do you think it's religion or spirituality? Because I find it's very difficult to talk about spirituality to a hungry person. But on the other hand, somebody who is having problems of overconsumption, he has to enforce fasting on himself.
Yes. Yeah.
Because that's a spiritual approach.
Yeah. I think you make a good point. In places of, say, lower economic situations, religion provides, actually, it's always been the way of religion, all religions, to provide community support. And whether that's through food or through like support with each other, it's a natural kind of community system. So in impoverished places, it's like you could lean into that and have support. But the other side of it is that it also is, whether we see it or not, it is a great platform for spirituality also, because you're already kind of divested of material things. But at the same time, maybe you could also see that a growth in spirituality in very wealthy places, because they also kind of see the triviality of material things. There is, I would tend to agree, I think there's more of a religiosity than spirituality at times in maybe more impoverished places. But again, I think the principle is, I do think that there is a great platform for spirituality in those places also. And I think some of the greatest religious movements have come out of maybe more like lower socioeconomic sectors, whether it's like, say, something like Christianity. I don't think that was a very wealthy, it wasn't necessarily a wealthy community in which that Jesus had moved through. And while Buddha was a king, he moved into an area of maybe ascetics where that's where he gained enlightenment. There are a lot of movements with more people. Like when there are people movements, religion tends to grow in these places.
Well, also on the other hand, we have a lot of data that says the higher the quality of living in a community, lower they depend on religion.
Yeah.
Like when you go to Europe, you'll see a lot of churches becoming restaurants. And at one point of time, this was a great place where people came and communed together and held together. I mean, and it's quite, when you go to a place where there's a lot of abundance and a lot of quality of living is very good, you have very low problems of poverty there. And there you can see people talking more about spirituality.
Yes. Yeah. That is something that so I work now at Stanford, and one of the things that we based a lot of our work on is a book called Cultivating the Spirit, which is based on a survey that was done in like 2015 in UCLA, University of California. And the majority of the students identified as spiritual, but only a minority of students identified as religious. And I think that there is, generally today, there's more of a tendency towards spirituality. The issue with that is that it's quite broad. And many times that's one thing that we offer in our Office of Religious and Spiritual Life. We do offer many places, and this is at Stanford, we offer spaces for worship for all religious traditions, but we also offer a place for people to explore what they might consider spirituality. So if they wanna meditate, or they want to do yoga, or if they want to go to public worship at the church at Stanford, they're all open, and they're generally quite interfaith. They're very broad. And the issue there is that you could be in terms of like spirituality, you could exist in like a marketplace forever without necessarily selecting one thing. And maybe it's better, well, it's hard to say. In some ways, that kind of broadness is hard for a person to get grounded. And sometimes it's helpful to have maybe more of a needle to enter into this kind of really grand spiritual world, rather than coming in with like maybe a big net, because it helps to kind of connect. I don't know if you feel that same way, or if you feel like the broad method is more, that spirituality is more of a better way to connect with divinity, transcendent.
In religion, they use the word God-fearing. I'm just trying to say, why do they say God-fearing? He's such a God-fearing person. Are you supposed to fear God?
Well, in my tradition, we love God. In our Bhakti tradition, love is the main factor. In fact, it's what we call rasa, this idea of like this essential relationship. Fear is there, obviously. Even in our tradition of Vaishnavism, we have many avatars of Vishnu, but we also have Narasimha. And he could seem fearful, very like frightening. But Prahlad, young little Prahlad, only sees love. And he's only treated with love. So there are some people that could look at God and feel fear. But what is that fear based on? Fear is based on, it's a transaction. Maybe it's more of a transactional relationship. Like, if I worship you, you'll take care of me. But what if I worship you because I love you? Because that's just that's our nature, is to love the divine, to love God, to love Ishvara, Krishna, or, the Devata, Ishtadev. So, yeah, to fear God, it's based, it is a part of many traditions. I've seen it. It helps them in their faith. I think that is based on kind of a fear of a need of a transaction of some sort. So I think that I don't think it's hard to say if that's just healthy, but it works for people.
You mean God-fearing?
Yeah. For some people, it seems to work. And I would say that in our tradition, it is love. Obviously, the relationship between, say, Krishna and many different people. If you read in the Bhagavad Prana, most people see Krishna, especially in the 10th book, they just see love. But there are some people that see fear. They see Krishna and they see fear. But that's part of their relationship. It is one of the rasas, that could be experienced. But that is also depending on the type of relationship a person wants to establish with God.
I remember watching a stand-up comedy by this famous comedian called George Carlin.
Yeah.
And he starts that with, imagine there is a heaven and there is a God who is supervising you, and he's keeping an account on what all the good things and the bad things that you do. And if you do something bad, he's going to take a note of this and he will send you to hell and burn you. And he has a accounting on everything that good and bad you're doing. And he also loves you and he loves money. This was just his way to put things like. And at one point of time, when you are in a place of deep poverty, that story can really put you in some places.
Yeah.
And at the same time, when you realize, okay, science can bring a lot of changes. Technology can bring a lot of changes. You have food, you can harness nature and bring things. And then suddenly you realize, okay, there is much more than comfort. There is much more than all the things. Even if you have 3-course meals and you have the access to the best mattress and everything, there is still something beyond this. And there is one way to God through poverty, and there is another way to God through when you have abundance too. Where do you see the difference between religion and spirituality?
I think what we saw in that survey, that CLA survey, was that I think people had also said that they associate religion with a lot of things, like whether the idea of institution, whether it's abuse of power, the history of, like, say, forceful conversions, things like that. The idea of identifying with that, or even more modern things like whether it was child abuse or scandals and things like that. In the modern era, most people, they don't feel comfortable connecting to a religious group, because all traditions have a history. They somehow still even start developing more new histories, things that happen more in the modern time. And so they identify with spirituality because there's a need that they have. They have a need that religion it means to connect, religio, to connect again. But they don't feel that they can do that through religion now because they have a lack of trust. And that was the idea in the survey. But spirituality, they know that there's an essence that they want to connect to, that they want to search for. And so that's really what we're trying to connect, at least in the Office of Religion and Spiritual Life, to give them something to connect through, whether it's the religious tradition itself or allowing them to kind of space to explore their spirituality or the religious tradition. In kind of a safe space, kind of like a garden that's kind of just like protected for them to grow. So most people will identify, it's easier to connect with spirituality, to say like, I'm spiritual rather than
I'm religious.
Yeah. And that might just be America. I don't know, but that was the trend in America, at least when the survey was taken.
But I see spirituality came out through a lot of religious teachings. Or can you say it that way?
Religion came out of spiritual teachings.
No, the other way around.
Spirituality came out of religious. Yes, absolutely. I would agree with that. And that is part of one of the projects that we've done, is this called Faith and Flourish. That I'm the Faith and Flourish Fellow, Akil Gupta Faith and Flourish Fellow. Akil Gupta had written this book called Bridges Across Humanity, which tried to see the thread from all these different traditions, of all these different topics, and saw that all these different traditions shared this concept, whether it was charity or love or, ritual, things like that. It tries to show that, like, no, these spiritual practices, these spiritual concepts has been nurtured by religious traditions, wisdom traditions for centuries. It is that. And so it does throw, sometimes when you say I'm just spiritual, you throw out the baby with the bathwater, unfortunately. But the religious traditions do have something to say. And it's just unfortunate reality of being human is that we have our shortcomings and these horrible things happen in history, but there's also a lot of redemptive things that have come through religion. A lot of like inspiration, these, whether it's to go against, the powers that be, to be free, or to see something that's wrong or contradictory to what the essence of it should be. There's always reform, and it's been going on and on and on for centuries. And some people say like it's always the same story, it's the same cycle, but it is also a natural aspiration in all humans to find that connection, that connection to the spiritual, to the transcendent. So yes, you are right. It's really not different. Spirituality and religion are connected, and I think that's why we have an office of religious and spiritual life, because that is the thing that we want to be clear to people, that there is spirituality in religion and religion in spirituality. Yeah, like the idea, for example, like ritual was such a taboo thing for, growing up. People like, oh, I don't want to be ritualistic about something. But actually ritual has a very significant impact on our practices. Meaning like, so one of the classes, when you were asking about some of the courses that we teach, one of them is called, we do a collaboration with the design school, the Life Design Lab. And that's an engineering school. And we have a course called Design Your Spiritual Life. And there's also Design like Your Religious Life also, which we're working on now. But one thing we asked and we taught it, the first pilot of it last year, we asked them what was their worldview, what would you think was beyond? And then we said, what's your ritual? Because what was ritual? Your ritual is what connects your world here and what's beyond. That's why people do rituals. It connects the things that we have in the world where we're ringing a bell, but it's supposed to be connecting, or we're saying mantras, but they connect to a transcendent. So the ritual isn't just like this arbitrary thing that we don't know well, it was criticized because we didn't know the purpose. Oftentimes we don't know the purpose behind it. Like if you've ever, sometimes people go to weddings, like a shadi, like a vivaha, samskara. And most people are just like eating in the background, but there's a lot of very significant things happening, and the rituals, and nobody knows any of, what's going on, but they're very important, like rituals that are connecting not just the two partners, but the families, the changing of the gotra, and then, the Mangala Sutra, and like, pay attention. You'll see these very important things that are happening. These very like deep impressions that connect people in the world to much more abstract things, like love and relationships, to God. So anyway, ritual, a very important part of religion. That maybe gets overlooked in spirituality, because they don't want to do mindless. You don't want to do a mindless thing. You want to do something purposeful.
So where do you see the difference in that religion and spirituality?
I do think that, well, we did mention, and maybe I'll say that, yes, there has been some type of religion may have a monopoly on this idea that there is only one way. And usually it is through the religions. We could cite many different texts from different traditions, say like this is the only way, Jesus is the only way, or there's only one prophet, or there's only one avatar, I would agree with that. The difference between spirituality, it's usually religion that says that. But I also think that there are religionists, people who are faithful to that tradition, or real exemplars of the tradition, who follow it through, like I said, that needle. And from that needle, it could go into like this big, deep area. And they have profound understanding of religion outside of their own traditions. As opposed to, sometimes I see people come through just being stuck at the universal spiritualist side. And they're kind of just like, they're kind of a jack of all trades, and explore all the meditation, yoga, going to church, Jummah on Friday, and it's also beautiful to explore those cultures. But sometimes I think you want to go deep in through one tradition, and out the end of that, then you see the beauty of, that's another way that people, so there are some, like, I think, enlightened people who do see the universality of it, but they also kind of maybe have identified as one type of tradition. There are other people who are quite different, say like Kabir, who was always quite everything. But there are other people, like in our tradition, we had Bhaktivinoda Thakur in like the 18th century, and he was quite broad-minded about the many traditions, but he was a Chaitanya Vaishnava, a Bengali Vaishnava. There are a few exceptions to that, but you're right. I might tend to agree. Maybe you could elaborate on this idea that, what do you think the difference between religion and spirituality is?
Like both are talking about it's like a GPS to God or beyond that entity that we call it as intelligence or the source energy. Some people call it divine intelligence, some people call it source energy, some people call God.
Yeah.
And you can call Ishta Devata. But I feel religion is like somewhere they took a patent on that path. And my pathway is this way. And there are multiple pathways that can lead to the same place. But my pathway is the only way and this is the only pathway and you should not go through another path. I think that's what religion does. Whereas in spirituality, they just talk about there are multiple paths and you can enjoy that journey and you can go through that. In spirituality, I think there is less place for guilt, but I do see there is a lot of guilt in religion. This is something I've observed. Like some God will come and curse you and you'll be going through this. And of course, that doesn't mean in spirituality you can be guilt-free or something. Guilt is there for a reason. You broke your standards and you have to live up to it.
Yeah.
But the tendency that you're guilty and you did something bad, you're a sinner and you have to go through that is quite strong in religion. This is what I have observed.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean spirituality doesn't endorse that or talk about this. And I'm not trying to say spirituality is another kind of religion. Let us not put that also.
Yes.
Let us not miss the forest for the trees.
Yes. But it gives a freedom.
Yeah.
A freedom for people to access.
Choose, yes. Somewhere I feel I have the agency to choose.
Yeah.
But there in religion, this is the way. But for some, it might work.
Yeah.
For some, this might work.
Yeah. The discipline is valuable. And to some extent, the guilt. It helps push you through certain difficulties. But also, you're right. I mean, that guilt can also weigh you down and not allow you to transcend, to be kind of caught up on the particulars without actually going for the essence of what it is. And I think that's also something that I think you and my wife had been speaking about bhakti and being the kind of essence. What's the intention of what you're doing? And religion sometimes could forget that and it gets stuck on the particularities rather than the kind of the intention, the need. Like, is the intention that you're going to develop love for God? Is that not the intention? But if a person says like, no, not your way though, that's not going to be love. That's going to be something else. That's going to be mixed up, or it's hard. But also, it's also can be dangerous to say in spirituality, maybe to be if you're too liberal, maybe there's also a chance to be
you miss the whole point. Yeah,
miss the point, or be taken advantage of in different ways. Also, religion, of course, has its own history with that. But yeah, spirituality, it does have a lot of access points, a lot of places to connect, and to maybe, as you're implying, see the essence more clearly up front rather than just particulars or there's no other way. Religion has a lot of answering to do. And I think part of the thing about religion is its continual ability to reinvent itself, to reform itself. For people to say like, no, this isn't the essence of our religion. And we sometimes say we're much more open to other traditions, and some are saying like, no, this is wrong, this is the real one. That's like a reform just to go back into another kind of like really strict way. Religion, I think they are two different things, but I think they need each other. I don't think we could have a spirituality without religion.
Of course, I think a lot of the spiritual teachings, they are actually coming from like Gita that we know.
Vedas,
take it is also coming from religion. Or I don't know if it, like I was reading in one meme, Krishna was not a Hindu and Jesus was not a Christian. Like at that time, there was no such thing that they were Hindu or Christian. They just taught their lessons on how to connect with that higher powers. But actually, if you look at that, religion is quite a new term. When you look at it from that, also you saw a pattern of pathways that took you to a higher self, and then you named it. This is one kind of a approach, and you call it as a religion.
Yeah.
And then more people you have, it's like, which is the stronger. And that's another way to look at it too.
Yeah, it is. It is a way for us. Maybe we do see that when we have the term religion, what we are acknowledging is there are these different traditions, these different paths, and these paths are constantly changing. Even within our modern tradition of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, which is ISKCON, and it's the fact that it became global made it adapt and change and values, and people fight it and say like, no, it's not like this. It's can't be like this, and it has to be like this. And, it goes back to the way, perhaps what the initial historically people had opposed, it becomes. But then there's always reform to try to be true to the teachings. And it's always going to be constantly shifting. Religion in many ways has a different trajectory than spirituality. It's not stagnant. It's not stuck. As we say, it's usually religion that get kind of sounds like it's stuck in a this is the only way. But there's always somebody's like, they always break off from each other and say like, no, there's another way. There's another way. And there's always changes. That's the great thing about religion. It's traditional, and it reforms, and it becomes a movement. And bhakti, in many ways, at least as I've seen bhakti, sometimes is a destabilizer for religion in the way, say, like, it's this way. Sometimes bhakti saints will, whether it's in Maharashtra or Bengal or in South India, they'll say like, no, there's an essence to this. And whether it's opposing ways, the perceptions of things, or certain ways that people lean on, say, ritual and want to reform that or focus on just the heart of something like that. It's always kind of restructuring in bhakti, I feel.
I think that was a very, there's a lot to learn in this conversation. And at the end of the day, it's about whether you're religious or spiritual, whether it's how much are you able to stay present.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And in that presence, I think it gives you an idea of where are you continuing that pattern. And in that presence can help you to come out of guilt. That presence can help you come out of shame or laziness. I mean, if religion helps you to be present, fantastic. If spirituality helps you to be present, fantastic.
Yes.
And I think at the end of the day, the proof of pudding is in eating. Like, are you able to stay present? I think that's the message that we all are trying to answer here.
Yeah. There's an honesty in that presence to be genuine.
Yes.
Because it's not easy to be present and not paying attention and not just like, oh, yeah. You really are called to task. Yeah, that's a good point. That was good. Thanks for bringing it back to that.
Thank you, Ken. It was I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah. I think a lot can also come from it. Actually, there's more. I was like, well, what are your thoughts about all the different traditions? And so much more to go into. And I love, like, I think today we had an Agnihotra. It was done so well, so beautifully. There's just, I think at Sitaram, you have tradition, but you also you have religion, tradition, and you have spirituality, searching for this essence. And all above it all is this healing. But at the center of it is this spiritual care that I think you do here at Sitaram.
Yeah.
And it's been quite a great healing experience for me and my wife. And we thank you for what an incredible kind of community you've built here. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. And it was an honor for us to serve you guys.
Thank you so much.